In 2018, a sitting United States senator did something no politician had tried before. She published her own DNA results. The family story had been handed down for generations, the way these stories always are. A Cherokee ancestor, somewhere back there. The analysis was run by a Stanford geneticist, and it found what looked like vindication. Evidence of a Native American ancestor roughly 6 to 10 generations back. She thought the test would settle the argument. It started a much bigger one. The Cherokee Nation answered within hours. A DNA test, they said, is useless to determine tribal citizenship. 4 months later, she apologized to them directly. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Nobody faked anything. The lab ran the test it was asked to run and returned a statement about her biology, which was never the question she was actually asking. That gap is where almost everyone gets laced. There are 5 different kinds of evidence that point toward ancient American ancestors, and they are nowhere near equally strong. Most people find the weakest one and stop there. So let's climb all 5, starting at the bottom. Sign 1 is the one you already have. You didn't order it, and you didn't pay for it. You inherited it, a face and a story that explains the face. The face usually means high cheekbones, thick straight hair, and the detail that sounds the most scientific, shovel-shaped incisors. Front teeth that curve inward at the back, like a small scoop. That trait is real, and it genuinely is more common in Native American populations. Researchers even traced it to a specific variant in a gene called EDAR. But follow the gene, and the case collapses. That same variant is extremely common across East Asia. And the 2009 study that identified it found the variant accounted for only about 19% of how pronounced those teeth actually are. It describes a pattern across a population. It cannot testify about you. The story half has the same problem on a much larger scale. In the 2010 census, more than 819,000 Americans claim Cherokee ancestry. The 3 federally recognized Cherokee tribes had roughly 330,000 enrolled citizens between them. That is 2.5 claimants for every actual citizen. Historians have traced where the story came from. In the 1840s and 1850s, white Southerners began claiming descent from a Cherokee great-grandmother, and she was almost always a princess. Cherokee society was matrilineal. It had no royalty. There were never any princesses. So sign 1 is worth something, as a reason to start looking. Never as a reason to stop. And notice what both halves have in common. Neither one comes with a single piece of paper behind it. Sign 2 does come with something, a number, 2%, next to the words Indigenous Americas. And for a lot of people that lands like a verdict. It shouldn't, and the reason has nothing to do with the lab. Every one of these percentages is produced by comparison. Your genome gets measured against a reference panel of people with known ancestry. And for the Americas, that panel is thin. So thin that one major company has openly described building synthetic reference individuals, stitching sequences together from several people to stand in for populations it can't sample enough of. There's a reason those samples are missing, and it isn't indifference. In the early 1990s, university researchers collected blood from around 400 members of the Havasupai tribe in Arizona for a diabetes study. The samples were then used for research the tribe had never agreed to, including work on migration that contradicted the tribe's own account of its origins. The tribe sued and won a settlement. That case is still cited as a reason many Native communities want nothing to do with genetic databases. So the gap in the panel is a consequence, not a technicality, and it moves. In 2024, one company split its old catch-all Native American category into 11 separate regions, and customers who had never spit into a new tube woke up with different ancestry. Then there's the deeper problem, which no better panel would fix. You don't inherit a tidy half of each parent's history. You inherit a shuffle. Full siblings routinely show different percentages from the same two parents, and when one geneticist ran the simulations, he found that an ancestor 6 generations back might contribute 5.5% of your genome, or nothing at all. Read that again, nothing at all. A real ancestor in your real tree, leaving no genetic trace whatsoever, which means a low number proves very little, and a 0 proves nothing. So what happens when a result is genuinely precise? Sign 3 is exactly that trade. It gives up almost all of your family tree in exchange for certainty about one thread of it. 2 tests trace unbroken lines. Mitochondrial DNA follows your mother's mother's mother, back and back. Y-DNA follows the father's line, and only men carry it. Both return a haplogroup, which is simply a branch label. 5 maternal branches founded the indigenous populations of the Americas. Geneticists label them A2, B2, C1, D1, and X2A, and roughly 95% of Native Americans carry one of the first 4. On the father's side, one branch dominates, and it's called Q. The subclade is QM3 is a Native American lineage. Its sibling branch, QL804, is Northern European. Same letter, entirely different continent, which is why reading Q and celebrating is like reading a surname and assuming you know the family. Get the subclade right though, and you have something genuinely solid. It just covers almost nothing. Consider the arithmetic. Go back 10 generations and you have over 1,000 ancestral slots. Mitochondrial DNA lights up exactly one of them. Y-DNA lights up one more. Every other branch of that enormous tree stays completely dark. A native ancestor on your father's mother's side simply will not appear, no matter how good the test is. That's a precise answer to a very small question, which is the whole reason the next sign exists. Sign 4 is agreement. Not one result, but 2 independent kinds of evidence pointing the same direction, because the only reliable way to catch a wrong conclusion is to check it against something that could not have made the same mistake. Science learned this the hard way, in public. In 1996, a skeleton eroded out of a riverbank in Washington state. He was roughly 8,500 years old, and early analysis of his skull suggested he was more closely related to Ainu and Polynesian populations than to modern Native Americans. 5 tribes said otherwise. They called him the Ancient One, claimed him as an ancestor, and were told for the better part of 2 decades that the evidence was against them. Then, in 2015, researchers sequenced his genome. He turned out to be closer to living Native Americans than to any other population on Earth. Members of the Colville tribes, the only claimant tribe that had submitted DNA, descended from a population closely related to his. He was returned to the 5 tribes and reburied in February 2017. A similar reversal followed in Nevada, where genome sequencing supported the Fallon Paiute Shoshone in their long fight over remains they call the storyteller. The skull measurements had been read confidently and read wrong. It took an independent line of evidence to correct them. Now shrink that principle down to your own family. At that scale, sign 4 is a cluster, a group of DNA matches who all trace back to the same documented branch of your tree, with the paper trail agreeing. Not one match. A group, converging. And the rules are strict. Shared segments have to be long enough to be real, with roughly 7 centimorgans as the working floor, because one study found segments in the 2 to 4 range were false more than 2/3 of the time. In communities that historically married within the group, matches also pile up artificially, and one genetic genealogist estimates such testers see about 3 times the normal number. Done properly, convergence is powerful. But notice its limit. It points at a branch of the family. It still doesn't hand you a person. Sign 5 does. And to understand why it sits at the top, start with a man who spent 30 years destroying it. Walter Plecker ran Virginia's Vital Statistics Office from 1912 to 1946. Under the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, every Virginian was sorted into white or colored, and native was not an option. Plecker went through birth records and struck the Indian classification out, reclassifying entire families with a pen. Tribal leaders call it documentary genocide. The law stood until 1967. He targeted paper because paper was the strongest thing they had. The best evidence of Native American ancestry is a documented line of descent. Your family, generation by generation, to a named person on an official roll. The Dawes Rolls are the largest of them, compiled from 1898 to 1907, when more than 250,000 people applied and just over 100,000 were approved. Alongside them sit the Guion-Miller Roll, the Baker Roll of 1924, and the Indian census rolls taken annually for more than 50 years. Nothing else on this list comes close. A name, a date, a roll number. That is descent you can actually demonstrate. But Plecker is the reason the reverse never holds. An empty record is not an empty bloodline. Sometimes it is evidence of what was done to a family rather than what was missing from it. And even here, at the top of the ladder, there is a boundary that no evidence crosses. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians requires an ancestor on the Baker Roll plus a minimum blood quantum, and states plainly that no DNA testing is acceptable for that calculation. The Cherokee Nation requires documented descent from the Dawes Rolls with no blood quantum at all. The Navajo Nation requires 1/4. Different nations, different laws, because they are nations. So go back to that senator and the test that answered nothing. It wasn't the wrong answer. It was an answer to a different question. Her DNA could speak to biology. It could not speak to citizenship, because citizenship isn't a fact hiding in your cells. It's a decision made by a sovereign government. That's the real ladder. A face and a story raise a question. A percentage suggests. A haplogroup confirms one narrow line. Converging matches locate a branch, documents name a person. And belonging? Belonging was never on the ladder at all.